Hi, I'm Lilia Lewis, and welcome to another edition of New Day, New Beginnings. Now, today I'm going to be talking about two very powerful kings, um, but they were both powerful in their own way. So, first, we're going to start with King Sennacherib. Now, he was the king of Assyria. He was a very mighty, powerful man, and he had a mighty, powerful army, and he could take any city he wanted, whenever he wanted, and just run it, and they would just be subject to him. So I'm going to call him the bully. Now, so the king of Assyria is the bully. So he can take over whatever he wants because he's so powerful and he's got an army that's just supersedes everybody else. So he did all his things through brute force and and he did it. He did it for many years. But on the other hand, there was King Hezekiah. Now he was the king of Judah. But he became king at age 25. I mean, he was really young when he first became king. So he didn't have all the know how and stuff that this guy had. He didn't know anything about ruling per se. But anyway, the one thing he did have was he was totally committed to God. So today we're going to be reading about these two kings. We're going to go to the book of Second Kings. And we're going to read through chapters 17, some in 18, 20, whatever. But we're going to learn how each one of them fared in his own way. But we're also going to learn who actually won the battle. Okay. Well, let's go first of all. We're going to start in chapter 18. And I'm only going to read verses 5 through 7 because I want you to understand the mindset, how King Hezekiah and why he was so totally dedicated and loyal and committed to God. So let's go to Second Kings, verse 8, chapter 18, and we're going to start in verse 5 to 7. He trusted in the Lord. He said, after him there was none like him. Among all the kings in Judah, none were before him or like him. He clave to the Lord, and he departed not from following him. He kept his commandments, which the Lord had given to Moses. And the Lord was with him. He prospered everywhere, no matter where he went, he prospered. And he would not give in to the king. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and served him not. He clave to him. And to clave, that means to cling to have loyalty to. And he was. He never let himself be separated from his commandments or any of the things that were of God. Not even though he had these threats and all of war. King Sennacherib, he wanted everything and everybody to be subject to him. But King Hezekiah, he wasn't having it because he trusted in God. And in the 4th year of his reign, the Assyrians took over Israel. And in the 6th year of his reign, they took over Samaria. But see, these Israelites were overtaken because they started disobeying God's word. You can't expect to have God's blessing and then not do what you're supposed to do. Now I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to go to chapter 17, back up to chapter 17, because I want you to know what they did to lose God's favor. So I'm going to go back to chapter 17, and I'm going to start in verse 9, because that's what this will tell us exactly why they lost God's favor. What did they do that was so terrible to make them lose God's favor? And in verse 9, it says, "And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. They built them high places in all their cities, and they had watchtowers and everything." Verse 10, they set up images, which you know you're not supposed to do. They had groves in every high hill. They made them under trees. Then they started burning incense, as did what they called the heathens, whom the Lord had carried away before. And they started doing wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. Look, they served idols. The Lord told them, "You shall not do this thing." But they did it anyway. And they sent the priests and the 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 other people, the prophets, to tell them, "You've got to turn away from your evil ways and keep the commandments. You've got to do it that way, or else you'll never get out of under their rule." Now let's go down to chapter 15. And no matter what the priest told them, look, they rejected all the statutes and the covenant. And the covenant was the agreement that God had made with their forefathers, with Moses. They ignored that. They ignored his testimonies. And he told them, "Do not follow these other people." And look, they followed them anyway. They followed vanity. They became vain. They went after the heathens that surrounded them. They just chimed right in with them. No matter what God told them, they did not pay attention. So they lost God's favor. And the more they did, the more favor they lost. And the Lord specifically said, verse 15, that they should not do like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God. Look, they made molten images, even 2 gold calves. They made a grove. They worshiped. They did everything that they weren't supposed to do, everything that was out of the will of God. Well, so that's just letting you know why God had turned his eye away from them, because they were totally not doing anything again that they were supposed to be doing. They just weren't doing it. So let's go forward. Now we're going to go back. Now, I just wanted you to know what they had done to lose God's favor. Now we're going to go back to chapter 18. Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, that's when the Assyrian king, he wanted everything, and he knew that Hezekiah was the only one that was defying him, so to speak, serving this God that he served. So in the 14th year um, of King Hezekiah's rule, the Assyrian king Sennacherib, he had a fierce kingdom, and he just came against the cities of Judah. He just kind of, converged on them, more or less, and took them over. And the king, he knew how Hezekiah felt. So he sent Hezekiah 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold, because he was kind of trying to buy him, because he knew how adamant Hezekiah was about not serving him. So he thought he could buy him off by giving him this gold and this silver. But look at chapter 18 and look at verse 15. It says, then Hezekiah turned around and gave him all the silver that was in the house of the Lord and in the treasures in his own house. And at that time, Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple and from the pillars, which he himself had overlaid. And he gave that to the king of Syria because he wanted him to know, you can't buy me. Look what happened next. The king of Syria, now he sent another set of people to Jerusalem, where also Hezekiah was. And he said, tell Hezekiah, thus saith this great king, the king of Assyria. Now, that in itself is an insult because he's saying nobody's greater than he is. That's his opinion. He thinks he's greater than anybody else. It says it right here, starting in chapter 19. And the people that he sent, Rashid says unto the people, he says, now Hezekiah, thus saith the great king of Assyria. What confidence is this wherein you trust? Where are you getting all this I trust him from? Who is this person? You said, but of course, these were just vain words that you were saying. You said that I have counsel and I have strength for war. Now, on whom dost thou trust that you can rebel against the king of Assyria? Who is it that you think you can trust that you will not be taken over by us? So now the king is saying, but I pray thee, give pledges to the king of Assyria, and I will deliver thee 2,000 horses. And he says, I guess you'll be able to have riders. So in other words, he's still insulting him because he's saying, I'll give you 2,000 horses. I doubt that you'll have 2,000 men to sit upon them. That's what he's saying. That's exactly what he's saying. So in other words, he's still doubting Hezekiah, and he's letting him know, I'll give it to you. I mean, if you got the men, fine, I'll give you 2,000 horses. And then in verse 28, the Rabshakeh, that's the messenger. Now he's talking to all the people in the city. So it says, and he cried out in a loud voice in the Jewish language so that all of them could understand what he was saying. And he made it loud and clear. And he says, hear the word of the great king, the king of Syria. Thus saith the king. Don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you out of his hand. Don't let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be delivered into the hands of the Assyrian king. Well, he's letting people know. And then he said, don't even pay attention to what he's saying, because he says, make a deal with me. He says, make a deal with the king. They called it agreement. In the Bible, it says make an agreement. The king is saying, well, make a deal with me, and until I come and take you away to a land like your own. Well, what's that mean? A land like your own? It's not your own, but it's going to be like your own, because you're going to have corn and wine and bread and vineyards and olive oil and honey. And that way you may live and not die. So he's still threatening them. He's still saying, well, if you come make an agreement with me and I'll give you some land, and at least you'll be able to live and not die. Don't listen to Hezekiah. when he persuaded you trying to say, the Lord will deliver us? Now I ask you, here's the king, have any of the gods of any of the nations ever delivered any land out of the king hand of Assyria? Where are those gods? Did they deliver Samaria? And who are they among all the gods? Any god you can name that have delivered their country out of my hands. What makes you think that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hands? He's still boasting and bragging about how great he is, how strong and powerful he is. But look, verse 36 says, the people held their peace and answered him not a word. They ain't even respond. They just let him be up there talking and saying what he wanted to say because they still knew better. So, but see, when Hezekiah heard this, he was very upset about it. He was upset about it because he felt like, he was getting nervous. So he had to do what he does best, his defense. So he covered himself in sackcloth and he went up into the house of the Lord. So when they go to pray, that's what they do. They cover themselves with sackcloth and they go up into the temple to pray. So he went up into the house of the Lord. And in the meantime, he sent a scribe and the elders of all the priests. He sent them covered in sackcloth as well. But he wanted them to go see the prophet. And they went and they said unto the prophet, they said, Hezekiah he said, this is a very bad day. It's a day of trouble, rebuke, blasphemy, and everything for the children of Israel. And to say rebuke, that means disapproval. He's letting the prophet know that it's a bad day because the king of Assyria is like coming down on us. He's trying to keep us down. He's letting us know he doesn't approve. And he keeps mocking God is what he's doing. Who is this God? So, and that's blasphemy because that's the act of insulting somebody or showing contempt, or for God, it's lack of reverence. He has no regard for God at all. He thinks he doesn't exist. He almost thinks he's God, like everybody's supposed to just fall down towards him. He really thinks that he is the only God. And so they asked Hezekiah to lift up a prayer in regard to this matter. So Hezekiah sent them to prophet Isaiah. Now, let me tell you what, let's see, chapter 19. I want to go to verse 6. Yeah, verse 6 and 7. Verse 6 and 7 says, so the servant went to Isaiah, and Isaiah said to them, you shall go and say to your master, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the word which you have heard with the servants of the king of Assyria, for they have blasphemed me. Behold, this is still the Lord telling Isaiah what to tell them. I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and then he shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So that's what he did. That's what God told him he was going to do. But at the same time, Hezekiah received a threatening letter from the king of Assyria. Now, while they're worrying about one thing, he's getting a threatening letter. But he took the letter, went up to the house of the Lord, and spread it out before the Lord. He spread it out before the Lord. And it said, this was his prayer: Lord, bow down thine ear and hear, open thine eyes and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he hath sent to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations and their lands. They've cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone, and therefore they have destroyed them. Now, therefore, O Lord our God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of earth may know that thou art the Lord God, the one and only. And then Isaiah sent word to Hezekiah, and he said, this is what the Lord said: Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, which thou hast prayed to against Sennacherib. He's letting him know now. The Lord said, I have heard your prayer. I have heard your prayer. And let's go to verse 32. That tells us exactly what it says. Thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria: He shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow, nor come before it with a shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way he came in, by the way he shall return. And he shall not come into this city, said the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote the whole camp of the Assyrians, 145,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib lost. He lost Sennacherib. And it says he departed and returned to his own city in Nineveh. To his own city in Nineveh. And that's where he went. And then look what happened. And it came to pass, as he, the king of Assyria, while he was worshiping in his house called Nisroch, that's where his god was, his two of his sons came in and smote him with a sword, right? With a sword, his own sons. And God, it's like they probably thought, when God said previously in in verse 7, when he said that he would die by the sword, they probably thought he meant in battle. But he was assassinated by two of his very own sons. They got away, they escaped, and they went and lived in Armenia. Now let's go right fast to verse 20. I want to get this to you as well. Let's see what just 1 through 7. Now Hezekiah is sick unto death. And the prophet Isaiah has said, Thus saith the Lord, set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. And he turned his face to the wall and prayed unto the Lord. And look at this prayer. He said, I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and have done that which is good in thy sight. And he wept as he prayed. And it came to pass, before Isaiah was even out to the courtyard, he got another word from the Lord. And the Lord told him, turn again, meaning go back. Go back and tell Hezekiah, thus saith the Lord, I have heard thy prayer. I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. I will heal thee. On the third day you shall go up into the house of the Lord, and I will add unto thy days 15 years. And I will deliver thee and the city out of the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my own sake and for my servant David. And Isaiah said, take a lump of figs. And they took the figs and they laid it on the boil. And he, Hezekiah, recovered. Not only did he recover, he got 15 years added to his life. Now let's real fast. Let's look at what each one of them fared, how they fared in their own way. Okay, but who really won the battle now? Let's think about this. First of all, king of Assyria, Sennacherib, he made out quite well for a while with his bullying tactics and his threats and all that stuff. Um, and that lasted for many years. But he still worshiped his idols because he had no belief in God. To him, there was no God. You know, he didn't even believe he existed. And everything he did, he spoke about himself, you know, what he accomplished, what he did. Everything was about him. He gave the credit to himself and his idol. He continually boasted about that. He even went so far as to question Hezekiah when he asked him, well, what makes you think this God of yours can save you from my hands? He was mocking Hezekiah for believing in God, but he was also mocking God because he didn't believe he existed. Now, remember, whenever he sent his messengers to deliver a message, they always had to start off by saying, thus saith the king, the great king of Assyria. He felt there was nobody that could supersede him. Now, let's look at King Hezekiah. He was only 25. But needless to say, he didn't have all the stuff and experience and all that. But he still had the upper hand because he knew where his strength was coming from. And he knew, once he never once felt abandoned by God. Now, he didn't care what was happening, regardless of these threats and the bullying and all that stuff. He never once felt, even when he got the threatening letter, he didn't even fear about that. He just took that up to the Lord as well. And in chapter 220, at verse 2, where he read where the prophet Isaiah told him that the Lord said, set your house in order. But then he gave him back 15 years because he trusted God. It was just amazing how it went. That just shows how fast God can work. He can work fast, he can work slow, he can work however he wants. The point is, whatever he does is always for our good. The only job we have is to trust him and believe him, just like Hezekiah did. So we'll sum it all up and say, the king of Assyria had a powerful reign for many years, believing in nobody but himself, but he died a horrible death by the hands of his son, because he never even tried God. Whereas King Hezekiah, he had many challenges, but he knew God was tried and true. And so he knew where his protection was coming from, not to mention an additional 15 years, and he won the battle. So I want to say, if you can relate to this story today, why don't you give God a try? Because you know what? My closing words are, you can't knock it till you've tried it. And until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.